Little girl begged to Hell's Angels. They're beating my mama. The Iron Horse bar sat at the edge of the highway like a worn but unbreakable fortress. Faded paint, metal siding, a busted neon sign flickering in the afternoon heat. Inside, it smelled of leather, engine oil, and the kind of loyalty only brothers in steel understood. It was one of those rare days when nothing dramatic was happening. No fights, no road trips, no arguments about who tuned their bike wrong. Just peace, a strange, quiet peace that always made Robert suspicious. Subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon to watch fun, interesting videos. Robert Iron Hand Patterson sat at the center table, boots kicked up, arms covered in old scars and new tattoos, swirling a cold beer in his hand. Tank, a mountain of a man whose laugh shook the table, retold a story about a ride years ago. Razor, sharp-eyed and quiet, cleaned a blade he swore he'd never used, but clearly had. Tiny, ironically the size of 2 refrigerators, tapped on his phone, dealing with club business. The moment felt warm, easy, almost gentle. Music hummed low from the jukebox, motorcycles glimmered under soft light, and the world outside felt far away. It was the kind of afternoon that reminded them why they stayed brothers this long. Peace between storms. But that peace didn't last. Robert felt it before anyone else. A strange shift in the air. A tension, like the universe inhaled sharply. Tank froze mid-laugh. Razor paused mid-polish. Even Tiny's phone stopped buzzing. Outside, something scraped against the pavement. Light, uneven footsteps. Then the creak of the heavy bar door, slow and hesitant. Every biker turned. A tiny shadow stretched across the floor. Then a barefoot little girl stepped inside. She couldn't have been older than 5. Cheeks streaked with dirt, knees bleeding, hair tangled like she'd run through a storm. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, as if she'd sprinted miles. Her small hands trembled as she clutched the doorframe. Then, in a voice too broken for her age, she cried, "Please, help me. They're beating my mama." The entire bar went silent. Bottles froze in midair, mouths half open. A stillness so heavy it rang louder than any roar of an engine. The little girl took one shaky step forward, tears spilling down her face. "Please, they're hurting her. They won't stop." Robert stood so fast his chair crashed behind him. Whatever was about to happen next, none of them were ready for how far it would go. Robert kneels down. The truth comes out. For a moment, Robert just stared at the little girl, unable to breathe. She looked so fragile, so terrified, as if the world had already shown her every dark corner. Her tiny chest heaved as she tried to speak again, but only broken sobs came out. Tank, the biggest man in the room, looked like someone had punched the air out of him. Razor's blade stopped mid-motion. Tiny's hand slowly lowered the phone. Robert moved first. He walked toward her slowly, like approaching a wounded animal, afraid of being touched. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee, bringing his giant frame level with her trembling eyes. "Sweetheart," he said softly, voice steady and calm. "Who's hurting your mama?" The girl gulped, tears streaking down her cheeks. My mama's boyfriend, Derek, and his friends," she whispered. "They were drinking, yelling. I tried to pull him off her, but he pushed me, and she screamed. She screamed so loud." Her voice cracked as she choked on the memory. "They're beating her. They won't stop." Gasps rippled through the bar, low, angry, controlled. These men had seen violence all their lives, but nothing twisted their gut more than violence inflicted on a woman or a child. Robert placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie," she whispered, shaking. "I'm 5. Razor cursed under his breath. Tiny closed his eyes briefly, jaw clenching. Tank's hands balled into fists that looked more like hammers. "You did good, Sophie," Robert said carefully, brushing dirt from her cheek. "You're brave, real brave." Sophie sniffled and pointed out the door with a trembling finger. "Mama's in the blue apartment, the one with the broken window. Please, they're gonna kill her." The moment she said those words, the entire atmosphere inside the bar transformed. The air thickened. The bikers stood up simultaneously. 15 hardened men, ready for war. Leather creaked, boots stomped, knuckles cracked. Robert looked over his shoulder. "Tiny," he said, voice turning sharp. "Call 911. Tiny was already dialing. "But," Robert added firmly, "we're not waiting." Tank grabbed his vest. Razor slid his knife into its sheath with a click that echoed like a promise. Bikes rumbled to life outside, the engines growling like angry beasts ready to tear something apart. Robert turned back to Sophie. "Can you show us the way?" Sophie nodded, a small, frightened nod, but she wiped her eyes and stood straighter, pulling heavy. The race to the apartment. Door kicked in. The roar of 15 motorcycles tore through the quiet streets like thunder rolling low across the sky. People on the sidewalk stepped back, startled as the Hell's Angels stormed past. Led by Robert, one arm wrapped securely around Sophie, the other gripping the handlebars like steel. Sophie pointed ahead with a shaky finger. "There, the blue one, with the broken window." Robert's heart sank. Even from a distance, he could hear it now. Dull thuds, shattering glass. A woman's desperate cries, swallowed by violence. Every biker's face hardened. The innocent should never scream like that. They stopped outside the building, engines rumbling, men dismounting as if preparing for battle. The apartment door on the second floor rattled violently from the chaos inside. A lamp crashed, Something heavy slammed against a wall. A man's voice shouted something vile. A woman begged for mercy. Tiny was already running up the stairs. Robert close behind with Sophie still in his arms. Tank and Razor followed, their boots hitting the steps like war drums. When they reached the hallway, the screams were unmistakable. "Stop! Please, stop!" Sophie's small hands tightened around Robert's neck. "Mama!" Robert kissed the top of her head. "Don't look, don't listen." But he knew she had already heard too much for a 5-year-old. Tank stepped forward. "Move!" One command, one word. He didn't wait for permission. Tank reared back and slammed his boot into the door. Crash! The door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges, flying inward and slamming against the wall. The scene inside froze every biker in place for half a second. 3 men stood over a woman crumpled on the floor, her face swollen, bleeding, hair matted to her skin. Furniture was overturned, beer bottles shattered, drug paraphernalia scattered across the table. The air stank of alcohol, sweat, and cruelty. The men looked up, shocked, furious, and then suddenly terrified. Derek, a skinny, twitching mess with a patchy beard, snarled, "Get out! This is my—" He didn't get to finish. Razor had already crossed the room, grabbing Derek's 2 friends by their collars and slamming them into the wall so hard the plaster cracked. Tank grabbed the 3rd thug and threw him across the couch, flipping him like he weighed nothing. The men scrambled. One tried to run. Tiny clotheslined him so brutally the man landed flat on his back. Wind knocked out of him. But Sophie had already seen too much. The moment her eyes found her mother lying bloody on the floor, a scream tore from her throat, a sound so raw it turned every biker's stomach. "Mama!" She tried to leap from Robert's arms, but he held her tightly. "Baby, no. Don't look." But it was too late. The image was already burned into her memory forever. Robert placed Sophie behind him gently and rushed to the woman's side, fingers trembling as he checked her pulse. Weak, but still there. "She's alive!" he shouted. Relief flooded the room. Right before anger replaced it, Derek grabbed a knife from the table, pointing it at Sophie. "That little brat ruined everything," Razor growled. Tank stepped forward, but Robert was faster. He caught Derek's wrist in one hand and squeezed. Hard. Crack. The knife clattered onto the floor. "You touch that child," Robert whispered, "and I swear I'll end you." Sirens, accusations, and a judge in nightgown. Derek howled in pain, stumbling backward as Robert released his shattered wrist. Tank stepped in, planting a heavy boot on Derek's chest to keep him pinned. The room shook with the weight of Tank's fury. "You think you're a man?" Tank growled, leaning in close enough for Derek to feel his breath. "Hurting a woman? A child?" Derek whimpered, clutching his wrist. In the hall, Sophie clung to Robert's jacket, still trembling. Robert gently covered her eyes with his hand. "Don't look, sweetheart. It's okay. You're safe now." But safe was still far away. From outside, the faint echo of sirens grew louder, fast approaching. Red and blue lights flashed against the broken window. Tiny peeked out through the doorway. "Cops are here." Good. And yet chaos was just getting started. Police stormed in first, weapons drawn, followed by paramedics pushing through urgently. Detective Sarah Martinez stepped inside, eyes widening as she took in the destruction. "What happened here?" she asked sharply. Before Robert could speak, Derek, still pinned under Tank's boot, began screaming. "They broke into my home! They attacked me! I want them arrested!" Tank leaned more weight on him, and Derek squealed like a broken whistle. Detective Martinez didn't even hide her disgust. She pointed to the bloody woman on the floor. "You're covered in blood," she said to Derek, "and it's not yours." The paramedics rushed to Jennifer. "Severe trauma, internal bleeding, unconscious. We need her to the ER now," one paramedic called out. Sophie broke free from Robert and tried to run forward. "Mama, please, Hospital night, fear, hope, and biker guardians. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and Robert climbed inside with Sophie still clinging to his vest. Her tiny fingers wouldn't let go, not after everything she had seen. The paramedic nodded, respecting Judge Williams's order, and strapped Sophie into the seat beside her unconscious mother. Jennifer looked pale, too pale. Tubes, straps, monitors. Everything made Sophie's eyes widen in terror. "Mama, is she gonna die?" she whispered. Robert sat beside her, laying a steady hand on her shoulder. "No, baby, not if these people can help it, and we're not leaving her alone. Not for a second." Outside, engines roared. 15 motorcycles followed the ambulance like an armored escort. Lights flashing, engines growling, street traffic parting like waves. Anyone who looked outside saw a sight they'd never forget. A convoy of Hell's Angels protecting a little girl and her broken mother. At the hospital entrance, nurses stared as the bikers parked in a solid, intimidating wall. Tank crossed his arms like a boulder. Razor scanned every movement. Tiny stood by the entrance like a guard from some ancient fortress. Inside the ER, chaos erupted. Doctors rushed Jennifer into surgery, shouting medical terms Sophie didn't understand. She reached toward her mother, but the doors closed before she could touch her. "No!" she cried, running toward the doors. "Mama!" Robert caught her before she hit the cold metal. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. "It's okay," he murmured, lifting her and holding her tight. "They're helping her. They're going to fix her." Sophie buried her face into his chest. "Please don't leave me." Robert's voice cracked, just a little. "I'm right here, sweetheart." The bikers gathered in the waiting room, filling every chair, leaning against every wall. Their presence turned the sterile hospital air into something warmer, safer. Hours passed. Sophie drew pictures on scrap paper Tank found at the front desk. She handed each biker a drawing. Dragons for Tank, skulls for Razor, a motorcycle with a princess riding it for Robert. Every man accepted their picture like it was sacred. At one point, Sophie whispered, "My mama says bikers are dangerous." Robert chuckled softly. "Sometimes we are." "Then why did you save us?" she asked. Robert looked at her, eyes warm but fierce. "Sometimes dangerous people protect good people. That's our rule." Tiny added, voice deep, "Nobody hurts women or kids in our town. Not anymore." Sophie nodded slowly, processing their words with a maturity far beyond her age. Midnight came. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Still no news. The bikers stayed awake. No one dared to leave. Even the nurses started bringing them coffee, realizing these men weren't going anywhere. At last, after almost 6 hours, the surgeon stepped into the waiting room. He pulled down his mask, exhausted. "She made it," he said. "It was close, but she's stable." Sophie's breath caught. "But," the surgeon continued gently, "she's in a coma. We don't know when she'll wake up." Sophie froze, too scared to speak. Robert knelt beside her, holding her tiny hands. "Baby, she's alive. That's the first step." Sophie nodded, wiping tears with her sleeve. The bikers exchanged glances. This wasn't over. In fact, it was only the beginning. Derek returns. A deadly standoff in the parking garage. The hospital settled into a tense quiet as morning crept in. Sophie had finally fallen asleep on Robert's lap, curled like a kitten seeking warmth and safety. Robert barely moved, afraid to wake her. Tank and Razor sat nearby, whispering strategies about what would happen when Derek finally faced charges. But Tiny suddenly stiffened. His phone buzzed, his eyes narrowed. "Boys, Derek made bail." Silence swept through the room like a cold wind. "That fast?" Tank growled. "His parents are rich," Tiny muttered. "They posted 100 grand like it was pocket change." Razor cracked his knuckles. "He's not gonna stay away. Scum like him never do." Robert carefully shifted Sophie into Tiny's arms and stood. His jaw tightened. "We stay alert. He's unstable. He'll try something." They didn't have to wait long. Barely 20 minutes later, hospital security rushed up the hallway. "There's a man in the parking garage asking for Jennifer," one guard said, wide-eyed. "He's acting aggressive." Robert's blood turned to ice. "Stay with Sophie," he ordered Tiny. He and the rest of the bikers stormed toward the elevator. Silent, deadly, united. The moment the doors opened into the dimly lit parking structure, they saw him. Derek, wild-eyed, hands shaking, face twisted with rage and desperation. He paced in circles near Jennifer's car, muttering to himself. When he saw the bikers, he sneered. "You can't keep her from me forever," he spat. "She's mine. She doesn't want your apology," Robert said, stepping forward calmly.